Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, the incoming Trump administration wants a return to traditional family values, and a lot of people who voted for him do too.
What does that mean for women and the many roles that we take on in society? And are we taking on too much?
Also, Detroit's support for public housing has been poor. Will that change with a new person leading the Housing Commission?
Plus, the future is black, at least according to the Institute for Afro-Urbanism. It's supporting black Detroiters in industries from food and agriculture to tech. We explore the infinite possibilities.
And we sit down with Detroit documenters. They attend all the city's public meetings to tell us what local leaders and community members are saying. Today, they'll tell us about a discussion centered on homelessness.
But first, right now in Detroit, renters make up about half of city residents, and home prices are increasing. Higher home prices are generally a sign of a healthy city, but Detroit still has a lot of poverty. And that means many people very much need access to public housing. Unfortunately, public housing has been in pretty rough shape in Detroit. The Detroit Housing Commission oversees public housing, and as of September, 20% of the commission's units were empty. It's been difficult for people to get housing vouchers, it's been hard for landlords to accept them, and staff inside the commission have reported feeling overworked and demoralized. Enter into the situation Arthur Jemison. He took over the department as executive director in October after his predecessor left in April. And he must now find a way to turn around the commission, which faces budget constraints. So could Director Jemison be an agent of change and ensure housing is more stable for Detroit residents? We've brought him on the show to talk about that. Director Jemison, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here with you and your listeners.
So tell me this. You were raised in Detroit and you grew up in public housing yourself. What was that experience like for you?
Actually, just a point of information. So I was not raised here. I grew up largely in Massachusetts. I was born here, and my mom and dad are former East Siders and Cass technicians, respectively. But no, I grew up in public housing in a college town, not unlike Ann Arbor or near Michigan State in Lansing, in a college town called Amherst, Massachusetts. So what it was like for me was, I had the luxury of living being the first tenant in my family being the first tenants in the new development that the town built, and I had the benefit of going to a great set of elementary and junior high and high schools. So really, it became a place where a lot of great things started for me. And I think that's really one of the reasons that I wanted to be involved in it again, as I have in other parts of my career, is because I think that if we do it right, it can be a starting place for many people's next chapter that we're, again, all trying to make better.
Okay, so you had a formative, a positive experience in public housing. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You said that really was a launching point for you in a lot of different ways. Can you explain that?
Sure. So, again, I think people have an impression of what public housing is supposed to be, but if you talk to people who grew up in public housing or work in public housing, there's an incredibly wide range of experiences. And so whenever people say that this can't work, I often say it can, but you really have to focus on what the means and methods. So just to be very specific, my mother and father, divorced, and my mother went about getting the credentials she needed to make progress in the town. We'd moved many times before, and so what it provided was really stability. I had again, this is what the whole code's based on: safe, clean, and decent place to live that was at a low price. And my mother was able to sort of stabilize where we were staying, and then she was able to get a great job, and then during that same period get her educational credentials. And so what's great about it was, again, it made it possible for her to kind of stabilize us, help us go to the same school, year after year, help us and get the kind of employment that led to her the future that she now has. So it's a stabilizing. It can be a stabilizing element of people's lives.
Was it hard for your family to get into public housing and be able to take advantage of that stabilizing force that you're describing?
I mean, there are all the application requirements and things like that. But as I mentioned, this was that town's first. That wasn't their first development. They had built a couple of senior developments, but it was the first family development that they had. So I know my mother had to be very attentive to all the application deadlines, et cetera. Not unlike people who are applying for to live here at the Detroit Housing Commission, where we have recently opened a waiting list as of October, and we've got a lot of households and individuals seeking our units. So yes, you have to focus on the application process, but it can be done.
So is it safe to say then that your experience in public housing was so impactful that it led you on this path? I mean, you were an assistant secretary for HUD, or the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So you've had a lot of experience here working in public housing. Before we talk about what it was like to do that at the national level, how much did these experiences pave your professional path?
Well, thanks for asking. I guess what I'd say is it's really one of the reasons why I've been in public service in the ways that I have been for the last 30 years. It's because, again, if you say to yourself, as a professional, you have a chance to sort of shape the way that, the places that people live, and hopefully, in and amongst all the things you're doing, creating the kind of environment where people can stabilize and grow. That's what it's all about. So at least that's what my career has been all about. So this is my first housing commission, but I'm thrilled about being able to serve in this way.
Now let's talk about, at the national level, the work that you were doing for HUD. Again, that's the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. What was it like to do this kind of work supporting public housing at this much bigger level? And what did it teach you?
Sure. So just to kind of a couple of points of clarification. So I was effectively the acting assistant secretary for community planning and development. They have a lot, sort of like many things in government, that's an acronym. Because until you have Senate approval, you're a principal deputy assistant secretary. So at any rate, I had that job, but in the area that controls community planning and development, so community development block grant funds, or CDBG, home, the things that a city like Detroit uses to participate in affordable housing investments, things like that. That was assistant secretariat that I was in. So it was first of all, I was honored to be asked to do it by the Biden administration. I've always enjoyed my 2 years of service there. I would say some of the granular things about working in the field that are enjoyable are a little bit harder to see because they're farther away, and it's hard to know what's going on in Elkhart, Indiana, or what housing conditions are like in Sacramento. And the thing that makes the work most exciting to me, at least, I have found, has been talking to real people who are living in the community you're working in about their concerns in a more direct way. So as much as it's amazing to have a chance to sort of shape the direction of something, it's there's a granularity that's missing. I was, just a further point of clarification, nominated to be Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing, which is a fantastic opportunity. Again, I was honored to be nominated. I had the chance to present my case to a Senate committee that reviewed these kinds of nominations. That was very exciting. I mean, I would just say that it's a political process. It's a very political process, and so I can't say I enjoyed every aspect of it, but it was an honor to be able to present my credentials to the Senate.
You're listening to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent alongside Tia Graham. We're speaking with Director Arthur Jemison of the Detroit Housing Commission about the problems of public housing in Detroit and what he's doing about it as the new director. Let's get into that, if we could, Director Jemison, into some of the problems in Detroit's public housing, because you do have a big task ahead of you. We know vacancy rates for public housing are high in Detroit compared to both the state and the nation, and it's difficult for people to get housing vouchers. We've heard that from folks, that the process is challenging and bureaucratic. Staff have reported feeling overworked. Why do you think there have been so many problems with Detroit's Public Housing Commission?
Well, I don't think you've got a long enough radio program for that, but I will give you my very best take on it. So, what we've tried to focus on are the two or three biggest indicators of our health, right? Occupancy of our units. As you highlighted in your lead-in, we do not have adequate occupancy of our units. There's a couple of things that are connected. Rent collection and recertification, which is making sure that people's incomes change annually, that they're being evaluated. This is connected to our ability to collect rent and have the resources we need to sort of fully staff this organization. So these things are all connected. So our real focus right now is occupying units. We have been we reopened the wait list in October after thoroughly going through the past wait list, which was opened in 2020, and so we've been making units available. We've got at this point kind of a group of about 6,000 to 7,000 households have applied, and we're in the process with our staff and with our what we call AME or sort of private manager partners, making units available to eligible tenants. If I could spend a day with you and show you all the ways in which this process is regulated, you'd see that it's a very intricate process for the wait list, what the people's priorities are, the site-based wait lists, the sort of wait list associated with the entire portfolio to prioritize people experiencing homelessness and other kinds of conditions. It is frankly very bureaucratic, but what we have to do is push this, push the bureaucracy, push our team to achieve the goals we have. So we're focused on getting 80 to 90% occupancy over the next 6 months. That's really the sort of standard we're focused on right now, and moving all the processes that enable that to happen. So just to give a sense of that, an applicant screened, eligible, sees a unit, likes a unit, signs a lease, it gets moved into that unit. There's a whole process on the other side of that, making sure that unit is available for their occupancy, and then doing all these things consistent with the rules. It's a challenge, but it's one that we're going to achieve. So I'm confident that over the next 6 to 9 months, you're going to see the changes that we're describing here that reflect higher occupancy, better recertification and rent collection rates.
Director Jemison, if forgive
Sure.
me if I could jump in here for a moment. You were mentioning all of these rules and regulations. I'm wondering if they're getting in the way of public officials being able to do their jobs.
Well, the short answer is yes, but the long answer is why. They're getting in the way of us doing our jobs because I think they're important. I mean, maybe it's easier to just talk about why, because people want to make sure that the folks who need housing the most get it first. And so a lot of the regulations I'm talking about have to do with, is this person income eligible? Is it the right unit size for that family? Is this person of the right age? And then, of course, I think most of your listeners would agree, we should try to get people who are experiencing homelessness housed first because their needs are greater. And so that's where the regulations come in. But again, we are working in an industry where there's a private sector version of this industry that does this work. So these are achievable goals. We've got private sector partners working with us. And there's a whole private industry of property management that's able to do this. So there's ways that we can grow to meet the goal. And I should also mention that we have a unique partnership, both with the folks who are unionized labor team, and we've also got a unique partnership with private property managers who are helping us achieve these goals now. This is something we took action on just a couple of months ago, inviting them into the process so we can perform better.
Director Jemison, I want to go back to your positive experience in public housing, and it makes me think about public housing in other countries where it is not at all stigmatized. In fact, public housing in other countries is often looked at as the place a lot of people want to live. Now, I've read that you want to not only rehabilitate but reimagine the Housing Commission, and I wonder how what I've just mentioned and how your experience growing up in public housing might factor into that.
Absolutely. I appreciate that question. So if you were to go to Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Seattle, Washington, or some of the other sort of high-performing housing authorities, what you'd see is a very different situation than the one we have. And again, I'm going to highlight it. I'm not going to say each of these solutions is right for Detroit, but I would just say, the Cambridge Housing Authority has, even though they at one time had, 5,000 or 6,000 units, they now have only 55 that they directly manage. All of those other units are managed by kind of a combination of private property managers, and in some cases in a corporation reflecting the historic unionized staff that work there. Those units are well managed. They meet all the metrics that we are concerned about: occupancy, work order turnaround time, unit turnaround time. But they're really largely a voucher management organization that does, and they did that over a 20-year period of methodically redeveloping their properties and managing them differently. That's a success story. In Seattle, they've taken a very similar approach, where they've methodically redeveloped each property, working in a partnership with their union in their union relationships to do that. But they've achieved really significant change. And the key thing I would highlight is in both those places, public housing isn't a thing that is sort of burned off and fenced off and separate from the rest of the neighborhoods of those cities. It's a key and integral part of those neighborhoods. In many cases, the Housing Commission is supporting units that are part of mixed-income developments. But even when they just rehabilitated the developments, they're located in strong neighborhoods where kids in those developments have access to the same schools that people who are down the street living in private housing have access to. That is so important, and definitely one of my goals is to make sure that public housing is better managed, better operated, contributing in a different way, and it's part of the strength of the city, not sort of a separate, burned off part that's not connected to the strength of the city.
Arthur Jemison, Executive Director of the Detroit Housing Commission. We will be staying in touch and talking more to you about your work. Thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for the invitation. Real pleasure.
Coming up, we'll dive into what a new organization and their new initiative is doing to help Black Detroiters thrive. And later on in the show, we're talking about memes and gender roles. Have you heard of girlboss or trad wife? Do either of those memes resonate with you? Maybe none of them. Give us a call and let us know. The number is 313-577-1019. Hello.
Oh, welcome. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Now, let's set the stage. It's the 1960s. Star Trek is new and becoming one of the most influential TV shows of all time. And it not only had Black characters and characters of color, but it was also the first time an interracial couple kissed on TV. But why am I bringing this up? Star Trek and its writers had the vision even then that the future included Black people and people of color. The show dared to view itself outside the social norms of a country grappling with the civil rights movement. And as time has warped on, Afrofuturism entered the stratosphere, opening up hopeful possibilities for Black Americans. The Institute for Afro-Urbanism, or IAU, is a data-driven organization that connects the African diaspora through research and targeted programs. Its new fellowship program will allow for legacy Detroiters to explore the future of Black life in cities and how the conditions in which Black people thrive. Joining the show to chat more about the year-long fellowship is Lauren Hood. Lauren founded the Institute of Afro-Urbanism at the University of Michigan. Lauren is also a writer, city planner, and community developer. King Moore is a poet and author. King is also this year's Youth Fellow at just 18. King and Lauren, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having us. I do need to correct one thing.
Yes.
So I didn't found it at University of Michigan.
Yeah.
I founded it on my own, out in the streets.
In the streets.
And then I ended up teaching at Michigan like last year.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. As a Spartan, I'm okay with that. But I'm okay with that. But thank you both for joining us on the Metro this morning. Lauren, we're going to jump and start with you. Why did you create the Institute of Afro-Urbanism in the streets?
Out in these streets. Well, I have been working in community development for about 15 years, and from various vantage points. I tried from inside the system to create the kind of change I wanted to see in the world.
Yeah.
But some people just want to do a job and get paid and keep a title. Everybody's not willing to turn over tables. So I was like, instead of me trying to get other people to move collectively from the inside to do something differently, I'm like, let me just try on the outside and see what maybe I can lead by example. So it's like the Institute exists as a platform for experimentation, but mainly as a response to the fact that the community development that was happening in Detroit wasn't reflective of our culture. So we're 80% of the population, but none of the development that was happening was reflective of who we are and what we stand for.
And I want to just build off of that a little bit, Lauren, because, talking about being within the system, trying to make it work, trying to get other folks to kind of yell with you. And, it didn't work. And there's one thing that's characteristic about Black women, especially in the city of Detroit, is if it doesn't work here, we're going to start and build somewhere else. I think about some of the publications that we have around here and some of the different things that we're seeing pop up. Black women have started them because it didn't work in that particular space. So can you talk about building in outside of spaces because you don't have a choice?
Yeah, I also understand that I am less risk averse than a lot of people. I realize that I have a lot of privilege that allows me to move in a certain way that maybe some people can't. But for me, the alternative is do I silence myself? Do I suppress what is authentic and real to me just in order to maintain comfort. That to me is more uncomfortable than being outside, being risky, taking chances. So there was no other option for me. I feel like we have a finite amount of time here, and I wanted to make sure that I'm not taking anything with me. You know, I want to get out everything that I possibly can in my time here to make the world a better place than how I found it.
I know. Clap and snap for that one. We're going to bring King into the conversation. And King, you're the youth fellow, because we're going to get back to the fellowship, of course. But King, I wanted to bring you in because you're the youth fellow. You're listening to Lauren talk right now. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great.
And it's early where he is. He's in California.
I know. So I'm so sorry you're up so early, but thank you for being up so early.
It's okay.
So you're the youth fellow. Why did you apply, and what did you think you could bring to the table?
Well, originally, when I first learned about the program, I saw that from being the youth fellow, the ways that I could participate, I always thought intrigued me. Like one of the examples was how they gave me a recording system, and I'm going to record and interview other college students around me. And just the fact that they cared about having a youth perspective at my age in a room that was very different than my age group just made me feel like intrigued and definitely grateful when I knew I got the program.
And you're talking about being in school. So where are you at school right now?
I go to the California Institute of Arts. I'm an experimental pop major, which is like mainly music production and engineering focus.
I wouldn't expect anything less. So, King, just thinking about that and talking to you and building on that as well. You're entering the chat. You're having a seat at the table at such a young age. Why is it so important to you that young people have a seat at the table, especially when we're talking about the future of Detroit?
I feel like sometimes when it comes to conversations about making progress as a culture, when there's like a separation in like age gap, it creates the feeling that like the issues are being fixed by one side. And the more we continue to include youthful people inside of conversations, the more it can expand how much we think we're allowed to spread our voices and how much they actually matter. Yeah. So I think this is just an example of it actually mattering.
Yeah, and Lauren, just hearing King say that, and of course choosing King as one of the fellows, the youth fellow, we have so many other amazing folks from the city of Detroit. I was reading the list of people, and like I know
it's a rock star cast of characters.
Rock star cast of folks who have been on the ground doing the work. Bryce Detroit, you got DeJuan Dandridge, Malik Yakini. What's the significance about this first batch of fellows, including King as well? So many folks. What's the significance of this group?
Well, I will say, I had these big ambitions to do like a public call and get like this nationally recognized group of advisors that was going to select the fellows. But I was working with a consultant to help me put some of the stuff together. He's like, you don't have capacity for all that. He's like, it's the first one. Why don't you just pick the people and pick who you want to work with? And I also have to confess, like part of this work in this platform is about me building my personal beloved community. So when I thought about the fellows, like, yes, I got rock stars in their respective disciplines, but I also thought very intentionally about like, who do I want to hang out with for a year and like into the future? Yeah. What I'm hoping is that I'm planting the seeds for some relationships that will span decades. So it wasn't just like these people are good at what they do, like I want to be with them. Like I like them as humans. They have the right energy. All of the selections were made with an abundance of intention.
And Lauren, I love that because it's one of the things that I've been wanting to do as well. Like, let's find some like-minded folks, put them together, and let's see.
That's right. Yeah, it's to take down these silos that we always talk about. People are like, oh, well, why did you start a new organization? There's so many out there. Like, everyone's working by themselves in a silo. I was like, okay, I'm about to break down some silos right now. Me and all these people about to do something together. Yeah. Like, we all know each other, and we all attend each other's events and programs. But what I'm trying to do is set a table where we actually build something together. And I'm trying to not be super prescriptive about it, just trying to set a table and create conditions for magic to happen.
Yeah, just let the work happen. And, Lauren, how do you break down those silos? People talk about it a lot. I know I even talk about it when I'm at work here. So how do we talk about breaking down those silos?
Well, you gotta, create the right conditions, set a table and call people to it. But I mean, I feel like the reason everyone said yes, everyone was my first choice. But I think that there were relationships already in place. Like, I'm not calling some stranger like, hey, you want to come do this thing with me? Like, there are people I've been, building with formally and informally for like over the past 10, 15 years. So when there's an existing relationship, it's not like there's no outreach that has to happen.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of proposition.
Yeah. You're listening to The Metro on WDET. We're chatting with Lauren Hood, the founder of the Institute of Afro-Urbanism, and King Moore, author, poet, and this year's Youth Fellow. And we're learning more about its new fellowship. Now, Lauren, I wanted to get to the fellowship itself so folks know exactly what we're talking about here. What is the goal of your fellowship? And go ahead and break down the entire name of the fellowship. I keep saying fellowship. What's the fellowship?
Well, I call the fellowship the Corps d'Afrique. So in doing some family research, I saw that my great-great-grandfather fought in the Civil War. He was in the 102nd Colored Regiment in Detroit. And when the Free Press wrote about this particular regiment, they referred to them as the Corps d'Afrique. So I read that, and I immediately wanted to adopt that name and, recast this group in the spirit of what that regiment did. So that's where the name comes from. I consider the fellowship like a co-learning journey. I feel like this platform that I've created with the Institute has allowed me to have all these magical experiences. I'm traveling, I'm talking to like best-in-class folks, interviewing. So I've been doing this research study, the Black Thriving Index, interviewing Black folks who are thriving in 4 different U.S. cities and 1 international city. And I've been doing all this work by myself. I'm like, let me see if I can take some other people with me on this learning journey and see what happens. Sometimes I'm in conversation with people and I'm like, man, this is amazing. More people need access to this. So it's really like a learning journey, one. Also, the fellows are going to interview people in their respective disciplines with the protocol that I've been using. So the definition for thriving that the Institute uses is equal parts agency, abundance, and audacity. So are you demonstrating that you believe you have control over your own outcomes? So there's agency. Abundance isn't just monetary. Abundance is like healthy relationships, work that is rewarding. I would argue, I have a lot of colleagues that might be conventionally successful, but can't be themselves all day. That to me does not look like thriving. So agency, abundance, and then audacity. Like, do you have the audacity to show up as your fully expressed cultural self? I feel like there is a lot of messaging that tells us if we lean into our Blackness that we can't have any kinds of success. So the definition that we're looking for and that I was looking for with the people I've been interviewing is like there's something cultural in the work that they're doing. So all the people that I've interviewed are like artists, creatives, people who've created like their own programs or initiatives, like in response to something that was going on in the world. They're all running their own thing. Same thing with all the fellows. Like none of them work for anybody. They've all created their own thing. So that's the kind of thriving that we're after, and we want to reverse engineer so that more people can have access to that way of being.
It sounds like you're anthropologist on the road. You're going out, you've put together your own criteria.
Well, let me talk about the constellation. So I've interviewed so New York, LA, Chicago, Atlanta, and Berlin, and done on average 65 interviews, 90 minutes each. And I was like, how do I re-engage this group of people that I've had these very intimate conversations on thriving with? I was like, well, I could go back and revisit the people. I'm like, no, this is what the fellows will do. So every other month next year, we're going to one of those cities where I've interviewed people to sit at a table with the thrivers in that respective city. So it's like I'm setting a table for some magic to happen. I don't know what's going to emerge, but I know that something will.
Wow. And so many questions coming out of that, but we got to keep it moving along here. I want to bring King back into the conversation because I do want to talk to both of you. Lauren, you did describe yourself as an avid daydreamer, a manifester. So I wanted to bring King in first to talk a little bit about that question. What does daydreaming mean to you, King? And how is it important, or how is manifesting important to you, if it is or not, when you're doing some of your work?
For me personally, I feel like manifestation, I honestly, when I was younger, used to be pretty denying in the concept, but as I've gotten older, I feel like the concept of manifestation helps me in tinier ways that I can notice now. Like just actually reaffirming that the things that I think aren't uncommon and that they have a reason for being thought in the first place. And that when things like this happen, when people know that they're meant to be in a specific room, that things will just be created from that itself, and new ideas will be made. So I do believe in manifestation.
Lauren, you call yourself that, a daydreamer, avid manifester. For you, what do those terms mean?
Well, I feel like words have power. So if you say it, it's real. But, I'm kind of a hippie spiritualist into metaphysical practices. And I don't know, I first became aware of The Secret in like 2008. And it's really helped reorient my work. One of the principles it talks about is like positive orientation. A lot of people know what they don't want in their life. We talk about, I hate this relationship is wrong because of these reasons. This job is bad because of these reasons. But if you were to ask people, well, what do you want? It's usually just a response to what they don't want to see. And I feel like that's the orientation my work used to have. I'm like fighting oppression and fighting gentrification, breaking down all these systems. I was like, okay, that's the stuff I don't want, but what would my life, my energy, my vibration look like if I fought for what I do want to see? So now my work is very much affirmatively oriented. So that's where these conversations about imagination and utopias come from. It's like whatever you put energy into grows. So if you're fighting against something and you're putting energy into it, the universe just understands you paying attention to it. You must want to see more, right? Yeah. So I'm like, let me put all my energy into Black people thriving and see if that can grow and expand.
Oh, I have to get to the last question. Unfortunately, I can talk all morning with both of you. But the final question is, for both, what does success look like for this fellowship? So Lauren, first, we're going to start with you, and then King, we're going to bring you in.
For me, I don't think about it in terms of like success. So I consider myself a creative. I have a million ideas in any given moment that never come into fruition. So for me, getting an idea out of my head and into the world and letting other people see it, engage with it, grapple with it, I feel like it's already successful. Everybody already said, yes, we doing something. Like it's not about not having an impact. It's going to have a little bit of impact or a lot of bit of impact. It's not going to have no impact. So for me, like that's all I'm looking for.
And King, same thing. What would success look like for you in this fellowship?
I was going to say something similar, actually, and that I just feel like the fact that this program was able to exist in the first place and reach to so many different kinds of people within our culture, that's already proof that change is possible. But for me personally, I think just hearing ideas and new ways of making change that I previously never thought of myself, just because I know that even though I do have a voice in the matter, that I'm going to hear things that I haven't personally conjured myself. So yeah, just to learn and to acknowledge the proof that change can exist.
King Moore, poet, author, and college student in California right now. Thanks for waking up so early with us, King. King is this year's Youth Fellow. And then Lauren Hood. Yeah, you're welcome, King. Thank you. And then Lauren Hood is the founder of the Institute of Afro-Urbanism. And I want to say thank you as well. Look forward to chatting with you more in the future, both of you more in the future.
Awesome. Thanks.
Coming up, there are a number of people who are housing insecure or experiencing homelessness in Detroit. We'll hear about what one Detroit department needs to do to try to help those folks out more. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. It is Friday here on the Metro, and more broadly in this world, or at least in this time zone right now. And that means it's time to talk with the Detroit Documenters. The Detroit Documenters play a crucial role in improving our access to public information. They're at all the city's public meetings, taking diligent notes on what leaders are saying, what they're not saying, and what community members have to say.
The Detroit Documenters train and pay residents to cover and report on public meetings in the metro area. Recently, Documenters covered the Detroit Continuum of Care Board meeting last week. That board coordinates housing and services for people experiencing homelessness in Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park. Care providers, organizations, and people working alongside the continuum of care typically give public comment. But at this meeting, resident Paula Sands also spoke. She said she wasn't getting the help she needed.
My name is Paula Sands, and I've been on the last 3 zones, and I'm trying to. I've been living in my truck and everything, and Rosetta has been a great help to me. However, we have still not been able to get shelter space, and we've been freezing. We are now in a vacant house, and we just need to know where's the help at for real.
Homelessness and housing insecurity are big problems in Detroit. More than 1,700 people are homeless in the city and also in Hamtramck and Highland Park. That's according to the latest point-in-time count taken on a single night, and that was at the beginning of this year. But it's hard to get a full grasp on this problem. These tallies really only capture a certain point in time. An interim findings report of Detroit's 5-year plan, which is aimed at ending homelessness, also shows many households are experiencing homelessness for the first time.
To discuss more of what happened at the meeting, we're joined by Detroit Documenter Nadia Ziad and Detroit Documenters Coordinator Noah Kincaid. Welcome to the show.
Oh,
hey.
Hi.
Hello. So first, Noah, give us more of an idea of the role of the continuum of care.
Sure. So there's continuum of cares in cities around the United States. They're a creation of HUD. So they're kind of created at the federal level. Here in Detroit, the HAND, it's the Homeless Action Network of Detroit. They kind of house the continuum of care. The continuum of care is like kind of the deliberative body, right, that helps approve contracts and all these things and coordinates amongst all the service providers. HAND, the coordinated HAND and the continuum of care, like they're not actual service providers. They just coordinate amongst all the providers that are here on the ground.
Thank you for that, Noah. And Noah, Outlier Media's Laura Herberg followed up with Paula Sands. That story was published this morning. Do we know if anyone from the continuum of care followed up with Paula?
They did. So in the meeting, right after her comment, Zachary Bethauser, who's the coordinated entry manager at HAND, he responded to her and got her name and phone number. And she said she did speak with him after the meeting. And ultimately, an outreach team drove out to her and dropped off some blankets and snacks. But there was no shelter to be given.
So that was about the bulk of her conditions, or what we know about the status of Paula's condition.
Yeah, that's all we know about their response to getting her services was, she got blankets and snacks.
That sounds a bit like a Band-Aid and not addressing more of the core issue. Nadia, I want to bring you into the conversation. How did Paula Sands' comment sit in the room?
It was a widespread discomfort. Like, they couldn't believe what they were hearing. And it was almost like they were reluctant to respond to her. Like, she never spoke at all, to the point where she had to, reiterate, hey, are you hearing me? They were super uncomfortable. Almost like she had been there 3 times before. So it was almost like they had never heard her before in those attempts.
We have a clip of Continuum of Care Program Manager Tamara Gaines.
There are plenty of families out there, and I'm trying to figure out what's the best way without opening up the floodgates of having family after family feeling as if they need to come to a board meeting to get help, if you understand what I'm saying with this. It shouldn't take that, but is there anything further that can be done so that there is there isn't a need to come to a board meeting to get help.
Okay, well, that speaks a little bit to the crisis nature of this. Noah, do we know the number of beds and shelters available throughout the continuum of care system?
We do. So Laura spoke with Tasha Gray, who's the executive director of HAND. And Tasha said that currently there are just under 1,300 beds available. But to put that in context, she also said that for at least a year, all of the shelters have been at capacity. So there's a demand that exceeds the supply. But also, she said that in recent years, the lengths of stay at these shelters has extended. So people are staying long, so there's less turnover and the beds free up less. Now, also to put this in context of the demand, just in the month of September, there were 1,452 households reached out to HAND looking for shelters. So if there's only less than 1,300 beds, and you have over 1,400 households, which to me, some of those may be single person households, but I'm assuming some are more than one person, right?
Sure.
So that just gives you a little bit of like an idea. The only kind of bright light here is the city is hoping that by January 1st, so with a week or so, they hope to have another 200 beds added to that.
I mean, the weather is so cold that feels like I wish that could be accelerated, because that feels too far away given what the temps have been like.
My goodness. You're listening to The Metro. We're speaking with Detroit documenters about housing insecurity and homelessness in Detroit and what government workers are trying to do to alleviate this problem. Continuum of Care board member Tora Brown, who is also a documenter, said this is not good enough. Here she is speaking at the board meeting.
This is terrible, and we should be ashamed of ourselves. And folks should come in here every week. It should have been more than her on the line telling us what they're going through. Because maybe if they keep calling in here, at some point we'll start listening and actually start doing the work that we are tasked with and making these shelters accountable. Why are you sending people here, there, and everywhere and taking field trips? Why are we not putting people in house?
Nadia, there's clearly a disagreement between Tora Brown and Tamara Gaines on the board about how to help people. Can you walk us through some of the details of that disagreement?
Okay, so after Miss Sand's comment, Miss Tamara, she said, you played that clip, but she was like, how do we get people to stop doing this almost? And it was very inappropriate. And I mean, to me, it felt quite passive aggressive, right? To say that right after somebody asking you for help in a public meeting.
Dehumanizing almost.
Yes, extremely dehumanizing. Like you're an inconvenience for doing this. And it's a public comment, so it's available to the public. So there's no way to stop people from coming in. And this kind of set off our fellow Detroit documenter, Miss Brown. And she basically was like, people should be doing this more often. You need to have a fire under your butt. Like there needs to be a divine sense of urgency that is making you help people, because there's people that need help.
Do we have an idea of how many people, a number of people are seeking help? We just talked a little bit about it, and we just heard a little bit as well about what's happening, and there's no fire and there's no urgency. Nadia, housing placement is determined by actual groups. So what does that mean? What are these groups?
Okay, so they're called acuity groups, and they basically prioritize the people who are seeking help based off of their SPDAT scores. SPDAT stands for Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. And so these scores are determined by, like, say, a person who is over 60, who is handicapped in some way, or things like that. And so these groups are from like group 1 to, I believe, 4. And they're basically used to say, this is who gets the temporary housing, this is who gets the permanent housing and such.
Nadia, how long do you think it would take for someone to get this kind of housing?
So anywhere between 2 months to 2 years was the time frame we were given for temporary housing in Acuity Group 2.
What do you think kinds of changes could be made to improve this process?
Well, for starters, the service that you're supposed to reach out to, CAM, right, it needs to be better. It needs to be better. We should not, to have somebody have to come to a public comment in order to feel like they are heard at all, and then to be dismissed at the public comment. That's a lot, and to find out through the public comment that these cam services aren't doing what they're supposed to do. That needs to have a change immediately. And also just the attitude that we're taking about this. There needs to be, like I said, that divine sense of urgency. The meeting was so lax. And it's like, this is not something to be lax about. Winter is very cold in Detroit, and there's people without shelter.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention and to the attention of our listeners. Detroit documenter Nadia Ziad and coordinator Noah Kincaid, thanks for joining us on the Metro. And thank you to Outlier Media's Laura Herberg for her reporting about this as well.
Thanks for having us.
Coming up, gender norms have changed a lot in recent decades, and the incoming administration has a very specific idea what many women want to be doing. And this leaves us with a lot of questions, both about what will happen, but also about how gender norms have changed. We're going to get into all of that.
We also want to hear from you. Give us a call at 313-577-1019 and tell us, what do you feel your role is in society as a woman? Do you feel more comfortable as the so-called girl boss? I don't know how much I like that term. Someone who dominates in the corporate world, or as what we are learning to be known as the trad wife or traditional wife, someone who takes care of the home. Or neither. Maybe you reject all of that. What does your identity as a woman mean to you? Let us know again, 313-577-1019.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Welcome back to the second hour of The Metro, where we go deeper into pressing issues in our community. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. In this hour, we'll be talking about the role of women in society and how it's evolving. And we bring this up because this has been on the minds of many people, particularly a lot of people running for office. Project 2025 is the Heritage Foundation's conservative blueprint for America. And President-elect Trump has nominated people who created this blueprint to be part of his team. Project 2025 wants to, quote, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. For his part, J.D. Vance, America's vice president-elect, wants women to be in the home. He wants women to be married, and he specifically wants women to marry men so that men can be the breadwinners.
I just want a cat. But gender norms look different than they did in 1952. And women have more choices about who they want to be and how they want to interact with others in society. And this leaves questions for women right now that we want to put to you, the listener. Give us a call, 313-577-1019, and tell us, what do you feel about your role as a woman? Do you feel more comfortable as a girl boss, or maybe someone who is a traditional wife, someone who likes to take care of home, or maybe you're neither? What does your identity as a woman mean to you? We'll be taking your calls throughout the hour, and now we want to dive deeper into this topic. Why have gender norms changed? And how much has the internet changed them?
Yeah, it seems like the internet and social media have had at least some influence in this space, if not a lot. Many Americans now use gender pronouns. They identify as having personalities that are more quote unquote dom or sub, meaning dominant or subordinate. They are liking or despising memes like girl boss and trad wife, where a woman is dominant in the business world or wants to be more of a homemaker. Bottom line, they're questioning what their gender says to others and what they want it to say about themselves.
And right now, we want to know, how much has our language around gender and our norms around gender changed because of the internet and social media? What kinds of changes are we even talking about? Philip Hammock is a professor at University of California, Santa Cruz, and an expert on sexual and gender diversity. He's here now to discuss all of this. Professor Hammock, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. So, how much, if at all, has the internet changed our gender roles?
The internet is everything, I think, when it comes to gender roles. I mean, there's no question that across the 20th century, ideas around gender and masculinity and femininity were changing dramatically. But the internet, and then particularly social media this century, I think really catapulted us into this new space, particularly around issues of opening up options when it comes to how to be a woman, how to be a man, or how to be neither in the case of the kind of emergence or discovery of non-binary gender.
And how much have specific social media websites and platforms had a hand in this shift? I know growing up for myself, huge thing was Tumblr back when I was in college. Everyone was scrolling Tumblr while in class or wherever we were, we saw Tumblr in some way. So what were some of those specific social media websites and platforms?
Well, you nailed it. I think Tumblr was the big game changer. Tumblr emerges and kind of right towards the end of the aughts. And by then you have particularly members of Generation Z, who are kind of hitting their early adolescence, are kind of maybe looking around and saying, I don't know if I fit into these conventional ideas of gender or womanhood or manhood. And in the pre-internet days, what would they have done? They would have looked around them, looked for role models in their families or in society, and they wouldn't have found much, or in the mainstream media. But with the internet and then with social media, they can go online, they can meet like-minded others, they can see a much more diverse range of how to inhabit their gender, or to frankly realize, maybe I don't actually even fit into this gender that I've been assigned. And so I think Tumblr in particular was really, and when I talk to young people, particularly Gen Z, they talk about discovering this whole new language, this expansive new language around gender on Tumblr in particular. And there was something about that platform that was really useful, especially at a particular moment in time.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Professor Hammock. What about now? What platform plays a role in those same type of conversations or shifts that we're seeing in a society? Yeah,
well, that's a good question. It's not entirely clear where people have sort of landed. I mean, definitely places like Discord that are a little bit more you sort of have to be in the know to find them, and to find the right Discord and find the one where you can kind of make a sense of community. To some extent, Reddit, where you sort of have these kind of more micro communities. That's kind of what was happening on Tumblr. We were seeing these sort of micro blogging, these kind of really specific kind of niche blogs, if you will. And we are seeing some of that kind of having migrated to Reddit. In the case of Tumblr, it really declined mostly because of the law that kind of Sesta Fosta 2018 that kind of and then eventually I think pornography was kind of banned on Tumblr, and so it sort of had to do with that, the decline of that. And a lot of LGBT content was flagged kind of incorrectly, actually, as pornography. And so Tumblr kind of ended up kind of being a mass exodus from Tumblr to some extent, although it is still out there.
Professor Hammock, could we go to some of these terms that Tia and I have been throwing around here, girlboss and tradwife? I'm wondering how they have come to play a bigger role in our culture. What do you think that these titles signal to people?
Well, I think what's exciting about these kinds of titles is it's showing that ideas around, how to be a woman, how to inhabit your gender have now opened up, and there are options. So there's these sort of micro labels. We talk about micro labels a lot in terms of sexuality and gender. And so there are these really kind of niche labels. And what's really exciting about this expansion of labeling is you can communicate so much more about yourself. So I'm not just a woman. I'm a particular type of woman. I'm a girl boss, or a trad wife. And I think that one of the things I really like about that specific example is it's showing kind of the full range. It's saying, well, if you are drawn to more traditional notions of womanhood or femininity, that's okay. You can do that. This is like when we talk about something like sexual and gender diversity, we're really talking about an openness to a range of being that we didn't have in the prior century. And so I think those kinds of micro labels are really exciting because they say, well, you can inhabit your womanhood in different ways, and that's okay.
So you see a lot of positives with these terms or micro labels. I like that. Do you think, though, there's anything negative about the internet and social media when it comes to the ways people are gathering new conclusions about gender? In other words, do you think social media at all oversimplifies the way people see themselves as either one thing or another, that perhaps it can stifle cultural imagination?
That's a really interesting point. I think that one of the exciting things that's happened this century, besides the kind of rise of non-binary thinking about gender, is also the rise in thinking about fluid identities. And so when I talk to young people today, I think exactly what you're describing. Sometimes when they encounter an identity or a label and they take it on, they think, oh, that's it. That's who I am, because they're sort of taught that, you form an identity and that's what you are for life. But then with this idea of fluidity that's become, increasingly widespread this century, I think young people are really starting to recognize, oh, that's okay. I can change. I can feel like a girl boss for 5 years. And then, oh, maybe this part of my life, I want to be more like a trad wife, And so there is that kind of, I'm seeing this with young people, particularly members of Gen Z, who are really seeing a little bit more playfulness around identity and seeing like, oh, this stuff can shift and that's okay. So identity is not destiny, I think.
Professor Hammock, I just love that little note there because if you would have asked me 5 years ago how I viewed myself, I probably would have said I was a girl boss. But today, I wouldn't necessarily lean towards that as my identity. I'm still kind of searching for that little micro title now, but I would have considered that 5 years ago. So that's a great note there. So let's go to the phones, actually, and bring in one of our callers, Kim from Novi. Kim, what do you think about gender roles in America now?
I grew up in the 60s. I'm late 60 person, and I watched women struggle within the traditional marriage. If their marriage was bad and something happened to the breadwinner, then it was a problem. They didn't have a way of taking care of their families. To me, it's sort of like, I don't think we need to peg ourselves. There needs to be flexibility. We shouldn't have to feel like we have to be one or the other. The other thing is this title of girl boss. Women are not girls. We're not children. We have our own ability to take care of ourselves. And I think as females, we need to stop calling ourselves girls once we reach adulthood. We need to be known as women because that's who we are. We are capable individuals.
Kim, love that note. Thank you so much, Kim from Novi, for calling the show this morning. And Professor Hammock, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, the first point about flexibility, absolutely key. I mean, just to, again, this idea of like not seeing your identity or the language you use at a particular moment as destiny, as like this is it for life. We've got to be flexible and fluid when we think about how we understand ourselves, because we're always growing and changing across our entire lifespan. And then excellent point about, I think this happens a lot. And why isn't it woman boss? Yeah. So, like that. In other words, like we really have to pay attention to the specific words we're using and what does that convey. So love that.
Yes. You're listening to The Metro on WDET. We're speaking with Professor Philip Hammock, an expert on sexual and gender diversity at the University of California, Santa Cruz. We're discussing how the internet and social media are changing gender norms. And if you're listening right now, which we know you are, and you would like to throw your hat in the ring, give us a call, 313-577-1019. Tell us what you think about gender roles in America today. So, Professor, are these new debates actually about gender roles, or have they just been tweaked slightly because of the internet?
Oh, great point. Yeah, I mean, I think they've been tweaked, more than slightly, in the sense that it's really the internet and social media and the ability for us to really, push back against the traditional ideas around gender categories and gender labels. I mean, that is really unique to this century. And so I'm just not sure we could have achieved it without something like the internet.
Professor Hammock, when we talk about gender roles, we really cannot ignore our political landscape right now. Trump's victory is notable for a lot of reasons, and one of them is being that he won and continues to win over a lot of men across racial and ethnic lines. What do you think, or why do you think he's so popular among men?
Well, I think one of the stories, while we do part of this revolution in gender that's happened this century, is an explicit challenge to traditional male authority. So the reformulation of gender and gender roles, I mean, is all about kind of pushing back on those prior ideas in which, men really did have the authority in society. And so I think it makes sense that what we're seeing is a backlash to some of that.
Let's stay on that topic, if we could, for a moment, this notion of a cultural backlash. Again, Trump, we have to, I think, acknowledge the elephant in the room here. He's celebrated sexual assault. He's been found liable for sexual abuse and defamation. And now he's nominated several people accused of sexual misconduct, including Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So can you talk a little bit more about how you think this is perhaps factoring into this cultural backlash?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think Trump has really taken it to a place that that is very aggressive, frankly, in basically trying to shift what we were seeing, for example, with the Me Too movement, which was like a really new cultural consensus on what was acceptable with regard to things like sexual violence, sexual assault, and what was unacceptable, obviously. And so I think that, Trump is really aggressively trying to push back on that. And in that sense, like trying to really change the culture in a direction that, would, I think, return us to a place where women could experience more sexual violence. And, will he be successful in the long run? It's hard to see. It's hard to tell right now. My crystal ball would say probably not. And that's because I spend so much time with young people, the vast majority of whom probably didn't vote in the last election. And so I think it's unlikely that we're going to return to that kind of moment. But right now it is alarming and it is concerning about what it means for the culture.
Well, thank you for giving us a view into your crystal ball. Philip Hammock is a professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and an expert on sexual and gender diversity. Professor Hammock, thank you so much for joining us today on the Metro.
Good to be with you.
Metro. From the WDET newsroom, a bill on its way to Governor Gretchen Whitmer would help ensure that juveniles accused of crimes have the same rights to legal counsel as adults who can't afford a lawyer. The bill would expand the state's commission to include an attorney with experience defending minors.
The city of Dearborn is offering free parental evaluation resource kits for parents who think their kids might be using nicotine, alcohol, or tobacco. Dearborn Police Department says the kits include info for parents and a substance testing kit. Parents can pick up the kits 24/7 from the front desk at the Dearborn Police Department, and they come in discreet packaging.
Coming up, we'll continue our discussion about how our gender norms have been changing and how women see themselves in the world. And we want to hear from you. Give us a call, 313-577-1019. It's 313-577-1019. And tell us, what do you feel your role is as a woman today? Do you feel more comfortable as a woman boss, someone who dominates in the corporate world, or as a trad wife, someone who takes care of the home? Or do you see yourself as none of the above? What does your identity as a woman mean to you? Once again, give us a call, 313-577-1019. Stick with us.
Thank you for changing that from girl boss to woman boss, Tia. I think that might have been my problem with that. I think I'm good with it now.
And after, it's just in my brain on repeat now. I'm like, woman boss, girl boss, woman boss, girl boss.
That's what
woman
was
boss.
irking me about it. Yeah. Not a girl. I'm a woman.
Hear me roar. We're the Metro coming up next.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And in the last 50 years, women's role in the workplace have shifted. For one thing, there are a lot more of us. Women now represent half of the labor force. And many of us have a lot more power in the workplace than in the past. Women CEOs now run about 10% of Fortune 500 companies. But there are still a lot of challenges for us navigating the workplace. That's especially true for those of us who are also a parent.
To discuss how women's roles in workplaces have shifted and what challenges persist for women, we have Aparna Joshi here. She is the professor of management and organizations at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Professor Joshi, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, glad to be here. Wonderful to be here, actually.
So there are a lot more women in the workplace now, as Tia just mentioned. Why did that come to be true in the U.S.? What were the factors at play that really pushed that forward?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. I think over the past 4 decades, we've seen women make such immense gains in their human capital, just in terms of their education. And we see that as an educator. I see that in my classrooms over the years. The gender representation of women there is perhaps the highest it's ever been. And that's also in law schools and even in many engineering disciplines, right? So these were considered to be primarily male-dominated educational fields. But over the past 4 decades or more, women have made immense gains in those areas. And they're slightly overrepresented, right? So I think that's why today you do see women perhaps better positioned to be in various so-called male-dominated and STEM occupations as well, which also happens to be the highest paid. So I do think that's paying off for women. They've swum against the tide, so to speak, and actually made more gains than your average worker in terms of education.
Professor Joshi, with all of these women entering the workplace, they are changing the workplace as we know it. Can you talk about the changes, how they have done that?
Yeah, I think there's good news. So there's a glass half full and half empty for everything, right? I think the good news is that, first of all, women's overall workforce participation is back to its pre-pandemic levels. And, as you noted in your opening, for the first time, I think that 10% of women are leading Fortune 500 companies. Now, that's a 2% increase from last year as well. So I think, and even in some of the more higher-paying occupations that used to be so highly male-dominated, like, medicine, law, dentistry, I think there's been almost a 20% increase in women's overall representation. So women are changing many of these so-called male-dominated areas, although they're still in a minority. They're not at 50%, right? So they're still in a minority. I think the place where perhaps the biggest representation of women has happened is in the healthcare industry. We do see I think more women than men in that particular industry. But of course, again, it's across all jobs. So that's the other way that I think the workplace is changing. And also, yeah, college-educated women are outnumbering men. So, women married to men are also earning about 1/3 of those marriages are earning as much or more than their husbands. So, that's the various trends here that we see that are on the glass half full side of things.
So women are now a much bigger force in the workplace,
Yeah.
but there are still a lot of barriers to climb the ranks. What are some of those barriers, and how have you seen them close those gaps? Especially, like you said, you saw a 2% increase in women leadership just from last
Yeah.
year. So, how are we closing these gaps?
I wouldn't. Yeah, so I think that although the gap has been closed, I think things could move faster, in my view.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that, as I said, the glass half full side of things, if you look at median wages, that's remained pretty stagnant. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag of things that has led to there's some gains, but also I think some areas where we need to make more progress, if you will. So I do think that, as you said, that the educational gains are paying off, but those of us who've been observing these trends still feel that more gains could be made. But yeah, I think I do think women having more leaders at the top is probably a great signal in those professions for women entering in. I think that adds to the overall. I think women change the culture of a workplace, which I think is tremendously important, especially as I was listening to your previous guest. So I do think that those are the ways in which there have been some changes, but I think more can be done.
Yeah. And just kind of building on that, we were talking about those titles and how we kind of, put ourselves under different little labels and here and there. What do you think about those, especially as we talk about moving forward as women in the workplace?
You mean like the
women boss
versus the trad moms? Yeah, I love that framing, by the way. I do think I think this relates to your earlier question as well. This is a complex sort of balancing act that women still have to play, right? And I think it explains. I think it goes back to my earlier point about why don't we see more change. And I think it's because women are still balancing this idea of, do I be a trad mom or do I be the boss?
Yeah.
And I think that's such a complex balancing act. Part of the problem is that the challenges still lie outside of organizations. I think the biggest problem or challenge for men and women going forward is access to affordable and high-quality child and dependent care, right? I think that's one of the biggest roadblocks to that. If women do want to make that choice between being a mom versus being a boss, I think it should really be their choice, right? It shouldn't be something that is imposed on them either way. And same goes for men. I mean, I think we should offer men those choices too, to be a dad versus being a boss, right? I'd like to see more of that in the conversation as well. But I do think that the roadblock is the access to affordable and high-quality childcare. And it's sometimes outside the purview of organizations. There's a very small number of employers, I think less than 6%, that offer, for example, on-site dependent care, right? So I think that as a society, and also, I mean, I do want to say a shout-out here that today men are doing more than their fathers and grandfathers did. So this notion of dependent and childcare is not just a women's issue. I think it's a men and women's issue. But I think it really is at the heart of that complex identity balancing act that you both were talking about earlier.
So it does speak to inequality in the workplace when we think about women who disproportionately are taking on childcare and shouldering that more than men. I'm wondering how else you see inequality showing up in the workplace, for example, with hiring.
Yeah. So I think on the hiring front, so I think many organizations have adopted, and I think very well-intentioned, hiring and selection practices that are often closing the gap at the entry level. I think the problem lies along the sometimes long and leaky talent pipeline to the top, right? So I think those are the places. So if you look at entry-level associates in a law firm, they're often 50-50%. But if you look at corporate level, in corporate law firms, if you look at women who are partners, it's less than 20%. So when you see that gap between a hiring class of 50-50 and the leader class of less than 20% women, there's still a loss of talent there, right? So I think on the one hand, I think in terms of hiring, you're absolutely right that I think organizations are making a lot of efforts in trying to be more gender inclusive. But I think there's still a lot of variation in inclusive cultures across organizations. So what happens is, and I think there, even though there is a lot of focus on DEI these days, there's still a lot of gaps in companies that substantively adopt gender inclusive practices and gender inclusive norms. So I think that remains a gap. And I think the other issue, which actually I was also thinking about this with respect to your prior guest, is that although, when you talk of the effective leader, who is an effective leader, if you ask a person on the street, they might often say that it's an empathetic and caring leader. But then when women show these attributes, they're not necessarily valued. So I do think there is still that subtle bias which manifests as these double standards for men and women when they reach those high-level positions. I think our research shows that, men certainly have more leeway in terms of what they're allowed, quote unquote, allowed to show as leaders, whereas women are still, I think, walking that very difficult balancing act between being a strong leader. If I'm strong, will I be effective? If I'm supportive, will I be viewed as a strong leader? So I think that's the balancing act that I think women share these, whether it's the identity point that you folks raised earlier or this balancing act of, what kind of a leader do I need to be? I think that burden still rests a little bit more on women. So I think that's the other, to your question about inequity, that creates an inequity for women at the highest levels.
Professor Joshi, thank you for encapsulating something that I have felt many times when I've been in leadership roles as a woman, trying to walk that fine line between being just firm enough, but also I think I'm like my co-host Tia here, we're empathetic people. And so you want to show a certain level of empathy and caring and understanding, but then that can be misconstrued as weakness. Right. And so can you give some advice to women leaders who are really trying to straddle that line?
There are many ways, it becomes an issue of I've come to a point after studying this topic for many years, is that we have to, I think, ask the question what organizations can do differently to manage these expectations for women leaders. How can they set the stage for women that this is no longer a balancing act that only women need to perform? I think men, male allies, other ways in which you can shift this conversation needs to happen, because I think too much of this is left to us, right? To figure out, am I too forceful here? Was I being too harsh on the person? I think we need more awareness and education of people responding to leaders, as well as asking what women can do differently. I think, we know the answer. Some of that lies in having sponsors, not just mentors, for example, seeking out other women who can amplify your voice and support you. Those are all the kinds of solutions that we have, certainly offered women, more leadership development for up-and-coming women in organizations. I think there are these practices in place, but I'm going to push the envelope a bit more and say that organizations need to do more to set the stage, to get the environment right for women entering into roles where they're often picked apart for these damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situations. Because as a leader, you have to show both, right? There's no way you can be an effective leader by just being one kind of leader. The idea of being an effective leader is to be a versatile leader. We allow men to be versatile. We are less, open to women being more versatile. So I think that's an issue of, I think setting the stage right, creating the norms or changing the norms in an organization.
Professor Joshi, we just want to go to the phone lines really quickly because we have a few folks who want to comment. Zoe in Detroit, thank you for joining us on the Metro this morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. It's nice to speak with you.
You as well. So how do you feel about gender norms and women's role in the workplace today?
It's complicated for me. So I went to college, worked in the art world for a long time, but somehow ended up opening and owning a craft cocktail bar that's focused on witchcraft here in Detroit. I became pregnant while I was working on that bar and had my first child the month after the bar opened. Her dad and I are not married, but are good co-parents. And I find that I have to wear a bunch of different hats and kind of take on different roles very seamlessly. So when I'm at work, I focus on work and try to really put my energy into that as best I can and know that my daughter has the care she needs at home and not worry about her or miss her too much. And then when I'm home, knowing that I did my work at the bar, I set it up, I did the things that I need to allow the business to succeed and kind of shut off that work brain so I'm not overthinking about all those things all the time. But in between those two things, making sure I take care of myself and have time to be an actual person and, take care of my own identity as an individual outside of those two roles. And I would say it's important for me as a woman, and I come from a long line of working females going back to the 60s and 70s, but it's important for all people to be able to shut off that work mode and be in family mode, or shut off family mode and be in work mode, and then also focus on themselves.
Zoe in Detroit, thank you so much for commenting on this particular topic today as we talk about women in the workplace and gender norms. And Zoe, if you are still there, I just wanted to ask you really quickly about that feeling of the maternal feeling, that idea that you have to have this maternal quality to yourself. And oftentimes we don't see that as a need or a want for men or fathers in that role. So could you talk a little bit about that pressure to feel as if you have to be this maternal leader after work?
Yeah, it's actually quite instinctual. I don't know if it's something I have to try and cultivate so much within myself as much as just manage, because it's constantly there and present. And I do know her dad feels quite the same way, where, there's just a lot of love and wanting to be a parent, but knowing that you have all the other things in life that require your attention. So being able to, like I said, really be present for that, be present for work, but then be present for parenting and shutting either, compartmentalizing, shutting the other parts off when that's needed. It's certainly not easy.
Thank you, Zoe. Professor Joshi, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I love your point about getting more dads and parents who are men also engaged in this discussion, right? I mean, I think Zoe's point resonates with so many of us who've been in that place when you become moms and you're just struggling, first-time parents. So hats off to Zoe. But I think her story resonates with so many, and I'd love to have more men at the table too, talking about parenting, I think.
So, yeah, that perhaps is the elephant in the room of this discussion. Yeah. is yes, we need men at the table. We cannot just have this discussion as women alone. Aparna Joshi is a professor of management and organizations at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Professor Joshi, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much, Tia and Robin. It was wonderful to be here.
This is the Metro. Coming up, we'll discuss what it takes to run for public office as a woman, and we want to hear from you. Give us a call, 313-577-1019, and tell us, what do you feel your role is as a woman today? Do you feel more comfortable as a woman boss, or someone who dominates in the corporate world, or as a trad wife, someone who wants to take care of home, or neither? What does your identity as a woman mean to you? It's 313-577-1019.
Stay with us. We're talking about women in office next. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And as we talk about women in the workforce, it makes us think about where they are missing. The city of Detroit has yet to elect a woman mayor. And next year, Detroit will elect a new leader. And there are some viable candidates and potential candidates who happen to be women, including City Council President Mary Sheffield. And former Councilwoman Chantel Jenkins is considering a run. Either could make history if elected, but what would it take for them to win?
There's really no blueprint on how to win the mayoral race as a woman in Detroit, or maybe there is. Maybe our next guest may have that template. Eboni Taylor is the Vice President of Programs for Higher Heights America. That's a political action committee that works to get more Black woman candidates elected to federal, state, and local offices across the country.
She joins us today to talk about the hurdles women face when running for public office and how they can overcome them. Eboni Taylor, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you both so much. I appreciate being here this morning.
Yay. And Eboni, I always ask, well, you from the city?
Oh, listen, born and raised, East Side, Detroit Public School, went to U of M. I mean, I'm Detroit and Michigan through and through.
All right, we're almost the same. I'm a West Sider, Michigan State. We're here. We never left.
You know what? And the rivalry, I won't even go there because it's all love. It's all Michigan
love. Right now, it's all love. Detroit, it's all love right now.
Right, exactly.
But, Eboni, explain for our listeners what Higher Heights does and how does the organization get more Black women elected?
Absolutely. Higher Heights' mission is to increase Black women's political power, to improve the lives of Black people, and then also to strengthen American democracy. And so our Political Action Committee, or PAC, endorses and provides strategic support to Black women to that same end. We, as you heard at the opening, we support Black women running at the federal level. So anyone running, certainly for Congress, we just experienced, right, one of our endorsed candidates who is running for president, current Vice President Kamala Harris, as we all know. We also support Black women who are running at the statewide executive level. So governor, lieutenant governor, in some states, that's actually a separate race for lieutenant governor, not the same ticket. We also support Black women running at the local level. We only do one local level, and that's mayor, and only for the top 100 cities by population. And so I have worked with campaigns across the country, current mayors, one of my faves, and I probably shouldn't say faves, but Sherelle Parker, who is the first woman, not just Black woman, but first woman mayor of Philadelphia. She is currently the 100th mayor of the city of brotherly love. I've worked with the campaign with London Breed, who is the current mayor of San Francisco. Unfortunately, she will not be continuing on because she did not win re-election. But I've worked with a number of Black women who are running for mayor across the country. And as a Detroiter, I'm especially looking forward to 2025 and jumping right in and seeing how we can support. We support all the Black women who are seriously running for any race. So we don't just focus in on just the person who seems favored. We focus in on all Black women who are seriously running.
And building off of that a little bit, because the important work that you're doing, trying to recruit and maintain and sustain Black women in politics in this realm, I often think about the pressure that it may be for Black women to maybe see themselves or hear these statistics, hear the things that are happening. We need more Black women here. We need more Black women here. How do you actually message to women out there who may be on the fence about that? And as well, how do you message to women who actually have the everything that you need, the right stuff, the quality, the characteristics, but they just don't want to do it?
That's why Higher Heights exists. That's why organizations, Higher Heights will soon be 14 years old. That's why other organizations we've seen win with Black women, right, where we know she started the trend of like bringing folks online on Zoom, these thousands and thousands of people. So these organizations are set up to help you. And so our message is, hey, if you're running and you don't know the sort of the folks you should have around you to run, let us help you. If you're running and you don't know how to set up, your fundraising platform, let us help you. And so that's what we do. Our PAC not only endorses, but our endorsement comes with a contribution. Our endorsement comes with our PAC, who is made up of just amazing political technicians, right, who have run like huge races, right, from folks who are communications experts to folks who are finance experts, folks who are honestly compliance experts, because we find that the barriers that women sort of come across have mostly to do with raising money and then also the compliance piece. I mean, I've seen great women run who are super qualified who are out because of a technicality. And it's really sad, but Higher Heights is here to offer that kind of support, and that's how we message to women who are interested in running.
So, Eboni, with all of this support that you're providing, it makes me wonder how you're determining which candidates you will support, because you don't have the support to offer to just everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like I said earlier, I think I said seriously running, that is, you have signed up to you signed up to run, right? You have a website, you have a way to be contacted. You have done some legwork on your own. You've raised a certain amount of money. I mean, we tend to, not be super sticklers about it, but at least some decent percentage of the previous. So for instance, Mayor Duggan, I think he raised like $1 million in his last run. So like, where have you gotten, right? What percent of that have you gotten to at this point that you've requested to when you've requested support from Higher Heights? And so have you run before, right? Mm-hmm. And even if you did not win, did you really get your name out there? Is there a name ID piece that we can look at? How much of the last election did you how many votes did you receive? So there are a number of factors that we look at, but we really do aim to talk to at least every we aim to talk to every Black woman who is running.
I wonder, when you talk about the amount of money that someone like Mayor Duggan has been able to raise, do we see a big disparity between men and women candidates in terms of the amount of money that women candidates are able to bring in generally?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's like I said earlier, it's a real issue. I know as soon as we say, hey, we're going to endorse you, one of the first things is like, how much money are you going to give us? And that's a real question, because it's such a need, especially if it's a competitive race. One of the other races that we worked on was for Richmond, Virginia, with Michelle Mosby. She was coming from council, very similar setup as one of the Black women that you named, who we know is running and has declared recently, but she's coming from council. She was council president. She, throughout the entire election, was top 2, top 3, and she wasn't successful. And I know that her opponents, they were raising more money than her every quarter. And so it's just harder for Black women, especially, but it's harder for women to raise as much money as their counterparts.
And if you're joining us right now, you're listening to The Metro. We're speaking with Eboni Taylor, Vice President of Programs for Higher Heights America, about the hurdles female political candidates face when they run for office. And, Eboni Taylor.
Either one
we're on last name basis with
you
now,
Taylor.
yeah.
Yes. My gosh.
It's my nickname for The Metro.
Exactly. No, Eboni, hearing what you're saying, and it's just building off of that a little bit, I wanted to talk about, of course, Vice President Harris's presidential run and in the campaign that we saw, and the anecdotes we were hearing from the community, the things that I was hearing as well within the community of, I'm not going to vote for her just because she's a Black woman, or I'm not going to vote for her because she doesn't resonate with me in this way or that way. Why is it that there are so many nitpicks when it comes to a Black woman running for office.
I mean, you saying that just made me like shudder, because I had so many conversations. Higher Heights did a Michigan bus tour. We were in Detroit. We went to Saginaw. We went to Pontiac, and we went all over talking to voters. This was, I believe, the day after early vote. And so talking to people, mostly men, and hearing, I'm not voting for her, not because of her not because of what she has done as vice president, not because of her credentials, not because of her ability to lead or her ability to follow through on her campaign promises. It was simply because she was a woman. And it's one of the most disheartening things. And it's really, when you think about having limited resources, limited time, for folks who are just that gun-ho about not voting for someone because of their gender, I think we have to move on to the next person. Like, I would have a message for them like, hey, look, if, for the people who said that to me in Detroit, I said, hey, I'm a Detroiter. I have 2 little boys. I have a family. These are the things I care about. I'm sure you care about them too. Her opponent does not. And that was the message I would just kind of say and walk away and move on to someone who is open to voting for her and encouraging them to early vote or show up on November 5th. And unfortunately, I think that for Black women running, there are going to have to be some non-traditional routes that need to be taken, like current Mayor Duggan, for instance. I read recently that he, was like, oh, I'm just going to lay back and sit back and watch, and watch who the folks who come out for this seat, and I'm going to vote just like every Detroiter. And I think it's going to take Mayor Duggan, especially if a Black woman rises to the top, Santil Jenkins or Council President Sheffield. I think he's going to have to come out and say something, because it will take, like I said, those non-traditional pathways, and that's just one of them.
In our last 30 seconds, when you're working to get Black women elected in a city like Detroit, a city that has yet to elect a woman mayor, actually 15 seconds, how does the strategy change?
Ooh, okay, 50 seconds. It changes by everyone being educated and understanding the issues. All Detroiters want a better Detroit. And so that's it.
Eboni Taylor is the Vice President of Programs for Higher Heights America. Eboni, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
That's the Metro for Friday, December 13th. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.
See you tomorrow.